Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Good to see everybody. Missed y'all last week when I was out. Good to see you. This is Jeremy Goulet. Jeremy is the name in our Morristown office. He is doing your job every single day, which is very important about this meeting. Because if he can do your job, and invest in houses, and make future passive income for himself, that's what that means. You can do the same thing. The same thing. And so I really think you should take to heart what he has to say. Because I think there's going to be lots of opportunities coming in the near future with this market for everybody. And then Chad, take Chad for lunch, and this is coming in a little while. So Chad talked to us about financing options for you as an investor, as well as for your customers and clients who might be buying properties that may need a little extra money. Okay, all right.
You want to do that in the middle? What are you thinking? What's good for you?
I guess as you're getting into the nuances of how much you may or may not need to buy a property, which kind of tie in of what programs are available.
All right.
Yeah.
And then we'll do
Documentable, no document.
Cool. I just think
Are you ready? Okay.
there's not a rush on that. We're gonna get to that. I have like a breakout about just kind of running numbers. Maybe we can transition.
Do it then. Perfect.
Whatever. Like this is a small group. Like, I want this to be interactive. Like this usually goes for about 2 hours. I'll hang out at the end too because I usually end up getting questions along the way. So just to give you some background on me, I know a lot of you. Right? For whatever reason, when I was younger, I had this convinced that investing in real estate was really, I don't really know why. So we're gonna get to it. My wife and I bought two family when I was 25. When I did that, I ended up having all these tenants coming in, and they're like twice my age, and I frankly didn't know what. And I just started reading every investment book that they had at the Morris County Library. Books, and one of the really good books I read was MRI. What was it? MREA, and I would never want to be an agent, right? So I thought the job of the agent would be to like go to like, you know, Bill Boswell and be like, hey Bill, like what do I do this weekend? And he'd be like, oh Jeremy, you're gonna go to an open house at 123 Main Street. Like, okay, and then what? Like I thought it was just like a job like that you would have to go in that scenario. But I read MREA and I was like, oh wait, this is like about building a MREI is about getting $1 million in investment. MREA is doing the same from a residential sales business. And if you marry the two together, you have really powerful company. So I got started, I think I got licensed in 2009, but I didn't take the jump for like 2 years. Kind of the story of like what transpired over like that, you know. So I think for anyone in the room who doesn't have kids yet, but really wants to get laser focused, I think having kids kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. We only have one big league investor. Some of you guys have had one investment property before. Anyone else with investment properties? I know. Keep kind of basic. You guys have questions along the way. Ask them if you're super specific. You're talking about like, hey, what kind of property or something like that. We'll take it offline and I'll just kind of tell you. Cool. Good. So, you know, one of the things I want to really like think about is if you guys really actually want to be here for this presentation. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean any offense to me, but like, you actually have control over what you can do with your time, right? So if you're tied to a job in a normal 9 to 5 setting, or sometimes a business can be feeling like that, like a 24/7 type of role, what would your life look like if you just got 10 hours a week, right? Do anything with those 10 hours. Like, well, how do you spend your time? You have kids that you wish you spent more time with. You have older parents that aren't gonna be around that much longer. Are there other hobbies, interests, things that have gone by the wayside that have taken up so much of your time? Anything come up for you? So what if, I mean, so what would it be if you had half your time back, or all of your time? The idea that money was coming in naturally, so you didn't have to worry about that. If you wanted to do it fast, you could, but you don't have to. Different kind of mindset. So, what do you think about this as you go through it? Because what I find the hardest part of starting the real estate investing is not the mechanics of it. Like, we could probably go on the MLS now and probably find a property that functions for it's mindset. Talking happiness, that's particularly like working with the sales side. That's what don't clients, like I always say, I've interviewed at a bunch of different brokerages when I first started, because I wasn't even Keller Williams anymore, so I was like, Burnersville. One reason I joined was MRK. I have no Burnersville, but I met with one broker and he asked me, why do people buy and sell this? What do you guys think? Why do people buy and sell this? Okay. Further than that, why else? I would argue that that's not really.
Somewhere to live.
Yeah. And why did they buy and sell it?
Because something changed.
Something changed, right? Like, I don't, like, when I bought my first house, like, if someone told me interest rate for 9%, or they told me it was 2%, at 25, that made no sense. Like, it didn't matter, because I hadn't looked before, so why would I know what the interest rates were, right? Like, when I got into the market in that 6 months, like, I think our first house was 6.875, but like, it wasn't the interest rates that were driving it. On a macro level, it does. But ultimately, why people buy and sell real estate is it's a change happen, right? You have a baby and then you're in a 1-bedroom apartment, it's not big, right? Your parent passes away. Now you don't need that property. There's a divorce happens and now maybe the house needs to be sold, but another person has to buy a different, right? So like that's fundamentally why people buy and sell real estate. It's not necessarily that the market shifting. It can squeeze things. I totally understand that. But I never found it was totally exciting to work with investors because they can always find a reason not to do it. And so I think oftentimes we, as potential investors, don't look at the big vision of what it can do for us. We think that too much of the short term. We go, oh, there's a lot going on. I don't want another thing on the plate. But if we think of that, the power of it from a long-term perspective, it can really open us up. Does that all make sense? Cool. So a little background on me. So I grew up in a small business. So my dad came back from Vietnam and didn't go to college. So my mom went to school. She was a teacher. She was a special ed teacher. My dad was working in landscaping, and he had to like make a decision if he was going to like start his own business because he enjoyed flowers and that type of stuff, or work. And so they took a loan out. My mom was like, "Hey, I'll try to support you," and they ended up launching it. And when they started out, it took a lot of like what I learned from it took a lot of sacrifice up front and a dedication for a long term. Not very much different with real estate. And what he was fortunate about was that he ended up being a business owner. Right? Would you guys agree that we're business owners and, and especially, particularly in the Keller Williams model, right? Like you can go leave tomorrow and your business is not staying with smart office, you can do your own thing. I think it's a super empowering thing of where we far. So, I think by dumb luck, and I think a lot of my path has been kind of, you end up in business. And 47%, right, number of millionaires are business. But what was interesting is he bought this piece of property. It was on, you guys know where Lebanon, New Jersey is in Hunterdon County? So they bought this piece of property on 22 in Lebanon, which I think at that time was like almost a gravel highway. Now, kind of an ancillary highway along. And he had kept this business for about 4 years. And at the end of it, he realized he had gotten plans to do a strip mall and had tons of engineering plans, an architectural plan, and went before the board and got all this approved. And he realized, like, oh my gosh, like this is really doubling down, like, expanding dramatically. He was in his he was almost 60 at this point, and like he was kind of burnt out. He'd been working for going on 40 years in business, and he saw the opportunity that he could actually pull out of it. So this was in 2006, and he looked at the market was on fire, and it's not much different than the market we've been in. And, after developing this business for 40-something years, who did he sell the property to? At a garden center. The interesting thing about a garden center is like what you're selling could die, right? So
Literally.
he was like literally there 5 months straight, not taking a day off in the spring because like you leave plants around, like the whole inventory. Oh God, so he ground it out for a long time. So, it's obvious he sold to another garden center, right? No, absolutely not. So he sold it, a piece of land, to a car dealership for like $1 million. Like he bought this piece of property for very little amount of money, but over time, all that was like the business was worth was like a piece of land, right? So it's pretty fascinating. So even though he's a business owner, what it was the real estate that. What's different with McDonald's versus every other franchise out
They own the land, not the property.
Right. So what's interesting about McDonald's is a third of their revenue comes from them being landlords. And, I would say, like, if we found out tomorrow that saturated fat in the fries is going to kill you in 2 years, one, I think they'd probably still sell a lot of fries. Two, if their business crumbled, like, they would still be okay because they bought all the land. Right? So, like, talking about insulating the business, like, all hell goes, hell goes to handbasket your business, and for some reason people stop eating McDonald's. Like they're still completely insulated, other than the places that are in Newark Airport and other places. Like they literally own the land, and they typically own the land on super desirable spots, right? Like if you think about McDonald's just in the town you go through, it's usually town centers on a corner at a busy traffic light, right? So the power of real estate is really kind of fascinating from the sense of like if you just hold on to the real estate for long enough, it's gonna pay dividends. So I sold their house that they've been in for 42 years, and I bought it for, was that 100 account? 300. And that's not even like crazy. Just sold a house in my neighborhood, and the original owners bought the house in 64, I guess. And I asked him how much he bought it for. I think he said 40,000. He has the exact same model of the house that I just sold him before he did it. Guess how much the house is that we started? Morristown, bought the town of Morristown. 25, it's like 28 acres. It went for 1125. Yeah, and you just the house I sold wasn't spectacular, but you just think about that, like from a time perspective, like just the velocity of what the block. So, if this slide doesn't inspire people to buy real estate, I don't know what. So, this is numbers from the Fed, so this isn't like numbers that I got from like the market. So, you look at this over time, and it's a 40-fold difference between what renters' net worth is to home. They just came out, because they come up with these numbers every 2 years. Anyone want to guess what they were for 2021? Think about this, because 2019 was before COVID. Run it over, what you got? Yeah, 300 is pretty much spot on. And what do you think for renters? Obviously, they're in the hundreds now, right?
$6,300.
No, they went up to a whopping 8,000. So, you know, and I mean, for the homeowners, it's 70% growth in 2 years. I mean, that's pretty fascinating, right? And then the other thing that's kind of wild is if you're talking about, and again, this is just the numbers nationally, right? So, if we think about this, I mean, are we an expensive place to live? Yeah, I mean, like crazy expensive. So these numbers are even more pronounced in New Jersey. Like the renters net worth are probably slightly higher, but you're probably still seeing that 40 difference, right? So I didn't pull it specifically for New Jersey, but I think in New Jersey, you're gonna probably see that number probably closer to more than 450. But then we look at the median net worth of Americans, and for people 45 years and older, 70% of their net worth is where?
Their house.
In their home, right? Pretty crazy. It's like pretty fascinating statistics, right? So if you're meeting with a potential buyer, I mean, I don't care what market you're in, the best thing you can do to them is to show them the path to homeownership. But why is that? Like, why do people have their net worth in their home? Like, I don't have the data on this, but I certainly can, I have a projection of like what I, because I thought about this stuff for countless times, I've presented on this. I think I've given this presentation about 10 times. So what are your thoughts? Maybe. Do you think people think that way? Yeah. But I mean, when you bought your first house, did you think like, did you buy it because you felt like it was like the right thing to do, or did you buy it from a financial? Yeah, like, I mean, you need something, you need stability for your family or something, right? So I think that people, and like, I always use an example, like, so if I, you know, I partnered with Bill and, you know, a friendly lender and Ron, and we all came and gave you a suitcase of $50,000 today. Well, we don't have any suitcases for 50 grand. And if I gave it to you today, though, like, we'd probably leave a financial seminar and you guys go like, leave here, go, oh, I should totally go and figure out how to, right? And then you start shooting down the highway and your check engine light comes on and you drive by the Mercedes dealership and then you drive by the mall and you realize your iPhone screen's cracked and you just figure out a way to spend the money, right? But what are the things that you're gonna pay first, foremost, more than anything else? Taxes, mortgage, right? I mean, I think real estate investing, all it is a psychological hack to force us to save money, right? Because otherwise, like, we like the idea of talking about like, hey, if I gave you a bonus and I ended up giving you, you know, in your corporate role, $20,000 more a year, are you really gonna put that into your Merrill account or Fidelity or something like that? Yeah, but, I mean, God bless you, but you're a minority.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because if that was true, people wouldn't have 70% of their net worth in their house. Right? Am I wrong? So, what's your average sale price in, let me ask you, so what do you think is considered wealthy for the top 20% net worth? Meaning, I mean, we think of the upper class in this country based on the 80-20 principle. Like, we think of a lot of things as 80-20. Like, one time I ran our market center numbers, we had in Morristown, we had, and guess what? It's an 80-20. And guess what? If you take that top 20%, do it again, guess what? Pretty cool. So that's the way that we also look at the federal government, which I think says the wealthy is the top 20%. What do you think the net worth is for the whole country? Whole country.
Surprisingly low. 500,000.
500 is pretty close. That's 600,000. Wow. Are you super excited to retire on 600 grand? Yeah, but like, but this is real freaking data. Like, I'm not making this stuff up, right? So everyone in the room gets squirming in their chair about like retiring off of 600,000. Like, 80% of people are not there, right? Isn't that kind of like scary? I mean, the middle class is considered between 43 and 200,000 in net worth. Right? And like, before you guys think I'm like making this up, this is all like federal data. Like, this isn't like me like maybe trying to like salacious like.
The marketing department?
Yeah.
Marketing.
Like census data.
I love that.
Like aspects like we're foolish for census rating in 2012, right? So, so going back to what your average sale price is in Sparta, I thought I live in Morris County, and if you run it through our friends at I use that in quotes, Zillow, the average sale price is 600,000. So what's the easy extrapolation that we can make between these two slides?
Top 20 wealthy people.
Some of the most.
You're break even.
Well, I mean, this is logically where I went from a real estate perspective of investing was, if you buy a house in Morris County and you pay it off, you will be wealthy. You'll be in the top 20%. So what's the next extrapolation we can make from that?
I more have. You do.
Voila,
Voila.
from the peanut gallery in the back, right? So the point being is, like, all the data here is kind of showing you, this is where people are building their wealth, right? If you rent a house, you're gonna kind of, you know, the statistics show you'll be in perpetual poverty, like it or not. Yes, I mean, you can all kind of make, you know, these arguments and say, well, I know someone who's super luxury and then they rented because that's a better viability. Yeah, great. Like, there's always gonna be outliers, but I'd rather, if I'm talking to a few hundred people in the region, I'd rather kind of just go down the middle and kind of talk to the masses, right? So if we're looking at it from that perspective, we pay off one house and we put a force mechanism on ourselves to buy a house, right? Why don't we just repeat that again, right? Does that make sense? And moreover, if we believe this data to be true, and I think you should, because I'm not making it up, then it also is pretty good reason why we should be getting out there and encouraging others to buy and sell real estate. I always joke, I say, you don't sell real estate, you like buy real estate. And I tell my clients that, and they're like, that's terrible for your business. And I go, nobody listens to me, so it doesn't matter. I can't tell you how many times I've run the numbers and people say, your house will cash flow if you just hold on to it. And, you know, if you talk to lenders, they can also use the income based upon that to approve you. And, you know, they don't want to do that. That doesn't count. But in the long term, that just didn't even make things a lot easier. Right? But I'm not gonna make it for them. If they want to be adamant about selling their house, who am I to disagree with them? Right? Does this all make sense? Cool. So going back to the fact is, you know, the old adage from Warren Buffett. But then it comes back to thinking about, for me, it was, I didn't want the same business that my parents had. Like, they worked nonstop, went 5 months out of the year not taking a day off, right? So that wasn't really an exciting proposition. Like, the result of that was that they had a business, and thank God they were able to cash out of that. Gone. But in thinking about, I always think of, you know, the analogy I always use is I'd much rather figure out a way to make $10,000 a year than get $100,000. Does that make sense? Because if we can just add on enough $10,000 a year by figuring out different mechanisms to do that, at some point we can hit our financial independence. Okay? The money's just going to show up because we've created kind of an autonomous system to allow it. So, yeah, it tells the story of like the mega event. When I was in 4th grade, I think the reason that, you know, I had COVID, when we all go through COVID, I had 2 months to sit around and think a lot. So, you know, that's why I wrote sports, but it was like, why did I end up doing it? Right. So when I was in 4th grade, you're my youngest, they asked like, what do you want to do? Anyone have an idea? Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know any time. I had a lot of friends that are attorneys, most of them. But Yeah, I said that I want to be a millionaire. That like seems like ridiculous and totally audacious, right? Like, but like, and I joke, like, I didn't have like pictures like my dad, like that was dad, but it was, I recognized that like my parents were around. Like, that see that kind of a plan through, think about, all right, how can we kind of do things for right. Well, and I mean, but I mean, maybe he's not just saying it, just, I mean, and he's probably saying. Right. And I think the exciting part is, like, the reason I really enjoy doing this class is it's not about making people a lot of money. It's that you get to the point where you're not forced to work at it. You get to do what you want. You can do some really exciting stuff, or spend time with your kids, or be a better agent because you're not focused on the money and you're just focused on experience, whatever that might be. I don't really care. But having that ability, it's just, I think there's a really clear path if you just kind of decide it. So, so this is what this kind of the lead graph. But when I think about the active side is what? Our residential sales. Okay. Is that active? I don't think there's a job that could be more active. We're on the phone, constantly. Putting out fires. If we're building a big business, it's like the calls just never. Right? I mean, we've unfortunately, us as agents, I mean this from the collective process, outside of all brokerages, we kind of like, hey, like, people go, I'm only 24/7. I was like, there's nothing in real estate that needs to be called out at like 10 o'clock at night, but for some reason, like, we've opened that door. And it's hard not to play that game because there's other agents that are certainly staying, right? So, on the flip side of that, I think the invested is truly the passive. So, if we can leverage our business, and so who's doing their business planning now? Right? We started a business planning now, so it's like, so we think about our business planning now. It's like it's great to think about the number of units you want to sell, right? And it's great to think about what your GCI is. But I think almost more importantly is what are we going to do with that GCI once we have the net profit? Like, I think the biggest decision we can make is like, okay, we're going to have a net profit this year of, say, $80,000. Would that be great, right? And then, what are we going to do with it? Like, that $80,000 could be 20% down or 25% down. Like, that's what will move the needle. Because if you keep doing that on a yearly basis, some really interesting things. Versus if I think do people know any big agents that just really don't have any money at the end of the year? I mean, I think the crazy part of it is
Crazy.
ego, and like everyone goes around saying, like, I remember my wife joined me in the business, and it was funny because if you ask any agent, they always say that they're busy. Like, I think it's like some sort of like bad honor. Like, and there was all these people in the office that were like, oh, I'm so busy, and then like the Circle of Excellence board came out in there, and I'm like, Susie's not on there. Like, she talks like she does business all the time. I'm like, yeah, she doesn't do it. And they're like, but how this other person, they talk about doing all this business, but they don't do any business. Like, the cool thing about Keller Williams is like we're literally an open book, so I can look at like anybody's GCI. Like, I think that's like a wonderful thing. And then there's other people that just put their nose down, don't really say anything, and I'm like, yeah, like I'm gonna have Kathy. So like Kathy like does like 25, she's done 25, 30 million like on her own like clockwork, and like she's the most unassuming woman like in the world. Like, and I'm just like, I was joking with her. I'm like, we take a freaking day off. I know you make a lot of money, so like just go and relax. So it's funny in the business on sometimes, there's agents that sometimes I think will lead with ego and all they want to be is number one. They'll spend every penny to be there. They're not netting it. I don't need to be platinum. I don't need to be on top of like, I just want to be able to take care of my family and that's mine. And I mean, that sounds better to me than being, cool. Questions before we move on? Comments? All right. So, would we all like to reach financial independence? All right. So, I think one of the best things one can do, because does anyone know what their annual budget is? Like, what it totally costs them on a yearly basis to survive? It's a great place to start, right? Because the great thing about it is, it can be really freaking scary. Or it actually can be not so scary. And you can look at it and go, oh, I didn't realize that I thought this number was a lot bigger. But one way or another, that's a important barometer to know, because how can we stop working if we don't know what it costs us to live on an annualized basis? Does that make sense? Right, but if we don't start there, like, I recommend just, there's a couple, like, there's an app that I use that is called Personal Capital, and the whole way that this company was set up was a financial, it's like a financial consulting, firm, and they built this incredible app that is really great. It's the best financial modeling software I've ever found, because if you have like multiple properties, you can do these. You can break it down so it shows like, I'm gonna sell this property in 5 years, and then cash flow is gonna be this. And you can do really sophisticated things and connect with all your bank accounts. What they do is the moment that you hit $100,000 that you're showing in there, like it's like Mint or something like that, they'll call you. Their financial advisor will call you to try to solicit business. So they see what you have, but that's the only thing. Like, you just can dock the calls coming from Colorado. But I think it's like the modeling software there is. And then you can actually model this out and say, oh, here's what I have in my retirement accounts. Here's what I have in an investment property. Here's what I have in profit share. And actually show what that looks like and see if it's, they actually have these things that are called Monte Carlo models. So run it through 1,000 different scenarios to show if it's viable for you to retire. So, but it's really liberating, because I've had conversations on the flip side of that where someone's saying, oh, I think I need to do this. I need to sell this property because I need to have money. And I go, you're already there. Like, you have, based upon your retirement and everything else, like, you could retire if you want to. You can choose to make this decision, but you don't have to make that decision just based upon your finances. So, does that make sense?
What's the
I
name of the app?
strongly encourage you to go do that. What's that?
What's the name of the app
It's
again?
called Personal Capital. It's like a light
Personal?
blue
Oh.
color. I think it's great. Just know that you're gonna get solicited if you show $100,000. But they can tell me, I don't really want to talk to you. I'm like, okay, so it's fine. But I mean, in the traditional model is the idea of you being able to safely take out a 4%. Like, so let's say you have $1 million in retirement. On a 4% withdrawal rate, shows that based upon kind of financial modeling, you can take that kind of withdrawal and continue and be rather relatively safe. Now, $1 million and $40,000, does that really get anyone super excited? No. So if you get, for quick math, how much do you need to get to 100,000? 2.5 million, right? So you need about 2.5 million in cash to get to $100,000 a year. And from my perspective, looking at getting $2.5 million in my retirement account seems like a pretty tricky thing to do, just on putting my money away from into a 401k or something. So, is this one avenue to do it? Sure. So, like, this is based upon, there's something called, has anyone heard of like the FIRE movement? It's a very much, your son probably had, very much more. And so where it really kind of kicked off is in Silicon Valley, they had these guys that were 22 making $250,000 because they're working for, one of these, Facebook and Google or whatever. And these guys pretty much ran these models. They're like, I don't want to keep doing this. They're just grinding as coders and they're making a ton of money as like young professionals. But this is the way they kind of modeled it out. They said, hey, on a 4%, withdrawal rate, this is what it's going to take us to retire. And a lot of them just do that. They grind it out until they, work for 15 years and then they move on. But to me, that's definitely one approach, but it's not one that seems like the most approachable. So, it could look like that, but it could also look like this. So you got an annual budget of 100,000, right? And so let's say you are able to put $1 million away in your retirement, right? So let's say your spouse is in corporate and has done the traditional round of 401ks or what have you. So on a 4% annualized basis, you got 25,000. Does that make sense? But what if you're able to pick up some residential real estate, right? Doesn't have to be residential, and you can pick up 3 doors, each one putting out $1,500 a month, and one thing is $1,200. It's like $50,000. I mean, is it crazy to think about getting $1,000 a month on an investment property? Not crazy, right? And what kind of down payment would you need to get? Let's say it's a $500,000, property. So, I mean, you're putting 20% down. If you're an investor and it's a single family, it's 25% if it's a non-owner occupied multifamily, right? Yeah. So, I mean, you might be able to leverage that a little bit faster by going that out. And the biggest emphasis is like, anyone in the room under 30? that's kind of what I need to. I think the biggest upside is like, if you're young and you'll get to the lending in a little bit, like your first purchase, I mean, that's where you can get an extreme amount of leverage and really start to snowball so much fast. It gets harder once you already have your own single family house because you're looking at 20 or 25% down. But if you're willing to have roommates and go into a multi and put 3.5% down, like that's a really intriguing way to get started. And it doesn't also have to be that you have to work constant. Like, I think we think about retirement, it's like that day stops and we just stop working. Like, yeah, please.
So just a segue, because we're on the slides, how does everybody get their $100,000? And well, the $1 million thing now is everybody's got so much equity. And so I get these questions all the time. I have equity in my house. Right, well, you have 100,000, you have 150,000 right there.
Right. I mean, the thing I advocate, and, you know, I don't know, I know a lot of lenders don't enjoy doing it. It's like, having a line of credit available to you is like massively important, I think, because like, and it's like, I've leveraged my, I have 2 lines of credit, but I leveraged my own personal house because I just like the idea of having the opportunity there to tap into a line of credit at any moment. So like, a house comes on, we're in Hopatcong, and there's a little bungalow that is for $150,000 because, you know, it has no heat and hot water. Great, like I can go buy that 150,000, do the work to it, we'll talk about it later, and then improve the property, and then go to a traditional loan and then cash out of that property and take the money out. So like, everyone's got equity right now. Think about ways that you can leverage that equity in an interesting way, or you can just do a traditional second mortgage or cash out on the loan there. So does everyone, how many people own their own house? How many people have owned their own house for the last 5 years? Yeah, you probably have a good amount of equity. So something worth considering. I can't believe I keep using it because I have a line of credit with Investors Bank, and every month I check and I'm still at 3% on this line of credit, which makes 0 sense to me because I have another line of credit that's gone up to like 6%, which totally makes sense. But for some reason they haven't adjusted, and I swear it's like, I'm like, is this a glitch in the system? Because I'm like, this can't be right. I'm not paying it down because it doesn't seem to make sense to me. So,
Jeremy, let me ask you a question. Is that from the life insurance? That's why it's on 3%, on 3%?
no,
Okay.
I had it. So I had my prior house that I owned, I got a line of credit on it. And it was at 3%, and it's adjustable, like it was never fixed, and they just haven't shifted it. And then I have one on my personal residence, and that one definitely has changed, like with the LIBOR, and it just has gone up, and it's still not crazy. I think it's, I think it's 5.5% or something, but, it's not as great. But so the 3%, I'm just leveraging, because I'm like, 3%, I'll be happy to keep 3% leverage all day. So yeah, I think with those lines of credit, you really need to kind of, sometimes these like little local banks have, they're like the rates on them are all over. So, and a lot of the big banks just don't want to do it. That's why I use Investors, and I have another one with a company called Third Federal. Thanks for asking. So yeah, I mean, I think we, continue to talk here. So I mean, the thing I want to think about from a real estate investment standpoint is like, there's all different ways to approach this, right? So if I'm in my 20s, I might be okay with having, a 4 family and also have a roommate in a 2-bedroom unit, right? Am I doing that anymore with my wife and 2 kids? They're like, hell no, right? Like, it's not happening. But in my 20s, we have to do that. Like, how many people in the room are sending their kids to college in the next 5 years? So, oh my goodness, you guys could start.
A lot of college.
I mean, what's college housing look like? I mean, what's the cost of that? Yeah, I mean, and there's a lender that I know that works in our office, and his kid was going to small little art college and a small industrial kind of like company. But when he was going, I said, no, maybe I should look into science. All the returns were like unreal, like, and he bought it. He continued to keep it, and it was one of these things where there's someone local who had already set up for like a management So like, he was paying like a 10% management on it, but like the numbers were still phenomenal with this out. So.
And don't
so-
you get the tax break if you own property in the state where your
Yeah, it depends on the.
child
school,
goes to
and-
school?
and there's, like,
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the case. Well, if we're kind of things set up that way, but I kind of explain to people like, all right, so if you're paying $20,000 a house for 4 years, yeah, we're saying $80,000. Like, how bad would the market have to turn? for you to- Right, okay, I mean, granted, I mean, all things being equal, it's like, you know.
If they're going to Miami, they're gonna live.
Talking about like NYU, we're talking about like, Berkeley, it's gonna be important, but like, think about the different schools that you're going to, because, if you're able to buy, even if it's a $300,000 condo, and versus what the housing cost.
Mhm.
Crazy. So, think about it from that perspective, my parents' advice, because sometimes it's not always financial why we're making decisions, right? Like, sometimes it's financial, and that's like a benefit, but like, who would like a vacation house that pays? Like, I would, right? Like, that's, I mean, I think this advice is great for empty nesters, like, they said if you buy a property that your kids will always want to come visit, they're always gonna come visit you, right? So it's like, I lived out in Hunterdon County in the middle of nowhere, and I like, didn't really love going to visit them, I go for the day and then come back, but then they moved down to Cape May, and it's like, we're down there at least 3 weeks a year, because like, it's great to go, and if we're renting a house on there, it'd be astronomical. And it's not a bad retirement place either, because they have very few kids in school, they have beach tags and parking tags and things like that. It's actually pretty affordable when it comes to New Jersey, a place to live. But, now you have the benefit of, A, having a vacation place, having some place that your kids might want to come visit. Carla Bornick from our office bought a ski property because their family loves to ski. It's up in Vermont. Airbnb, I mean, the numbers were great, and she's got a destination place for her family that wants to actually go there. So it doesn't always have to be numbers driven.
How do you work out, knowing the success of an Airbnb?
I mean,
Like, it's just a big risk,
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean?
100%. But I mean, my suggestion to her, because I kind of like mentor her a little bit, was like, go test out different towns and see how that goes. And so she went to this one place, I think it was in upstate New York or something, and she stayed at this place, and it was great. And her husband, the one she rented from, this lady and her husband owned like 4 properties. So she was like, just send this lady a note and see if she'll talk to you. And so she had a long conversation with her, and the woman kind of explained everything that was good and bad about doing these Airbnb or short-term rentals. At the end of the day, said like, hey, this has been, life-changing for us. It's been great. It's been, really great as a retirement thing. That built the confidence in her. I mean, a lot of this is you're gonna have to be your own market. So she's in Ludlow, Vermont, and that market's gotten kind of inundated with different Airbnbs. Is it as attractive as it was from an Airbnb investment? Probably not, but 3 years ago, she bought it for $325, and it's probably worth $600 now. So that doesn't stop, right? So like, I mean, if you're doing your research up front, like, I think that's really what it comes down to. There's no guarantees, right? But
They regulate them a lot.
yeah, I think when it comes to Airbnbs, the biggest thing is you have to know, like if you talk about like the Poconos, there's places that won't allow them at all, or they'll allow them for, you have to have a month rental or something like that. So you have to know your local jurisdiction. And, if these things are before the board. I had a client who Morristown literally wrote the code for Airbnb because of him. Because he went and he house hacked. And he had like 2 rooms on the Airbnb, because Airbnb only allows you to have 1, but he had the exact same room. So he rented 1 and he would just keep the other one live because it was the exact same room, and he rented that one out. And he was like 23, right? So he lived there for free, and he was making $1,200. He was making $1,200 a month to live in this house. But like, he was okay with it because he didn't mind having 3 roommates, right? Like, a lot of the people who live in Morristown have 3 roommates, but they're paying $2,000 a month, right? So they literally wrote the code on it. Now he has 2 renters, so it's not as attractive, but he's absolutely crushed it with that. So you just have to do this. What are the ways to invest in real estate? Are these all pretty familiar with you guys? House hacking, we kind of talked about a little bit. I like the idea of like, I think it's from an investment standpoint, we always want to buy things where we can build equity. So like, when we talk about commercial real estate, why commercial is a lot different than residential, a very like book jacket way of describing it is people are buying commercial in the sense of where's the opportunity to add value and then push the rents higher and then sell it from that. But we can look at things from a residential standpoint, right? Like, like in this market now, the people that are buying the fully renovated, gorgeous properties that are getting still 6, 8 offers on, like, are those houses gonna be, are they really worth that? I don't know. Those are the ones that don't appraise, right? Those are the ones that kind of scare the heck out of me. We're still seeing those houses that, you know, our grandma's house with the shag carpet, kitchen and bathrooms need to be done. Like, there's still values there. And there's gonna be the most value in the short term when we start to see the market recede, right? So like, if you can buy a property where you can add value to it, you know, that's a way to build the equity up immediately. I like the model of when we get to it, just living in it, fixing it up, and then from that perspective, rent it out, or maybe you just move on to the next house. You build something out of that versus buying something that's completely free. Flip space, more, is everyone familiar with the Burr model? Yes, no? So like the biggest piece, I've worked with a bunch of investors and met with a bunch of investors for, you know, real estate in general. And the biggest piece of advice I get from people that had a flipping business from long-term memory. Anyone get what the number one piece of advice was? Yeah, so you're quick on it. So most of the time they're like, give me all sorts of answers. Yeah, to hold on. And right, so like if someone has a robust flipping business, they can't hold on, right? But they can hold on to every third or fourth, right? And, you know, because over time, like anyone who sold a flip 3 or 4 years ago is like cursing themselves, right? And the problem with flipping too is if you do it on a short term, you're taxed out the wazoo, and it's really not as attractive once you actually go through all the numbers. Like you can get a nice return on it. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and at the end of the day, it, you know, once you throw all the taxes and expenses in it, it's meager some of these returns they're making, especially in a market like now, and everyone's going up, right? I'm just seeing very few flippers out there doing being successful. You're seeing flips on houses that we didn't used to see before. Like I know in Morristown, we're seeing people buying houses for $600,000 or $700,000 and flipping them, which usually flippers wouldn't touch and only be touching stuff in the low end. Because there's a lot more risk, right? You find for $600,000 or $700,000, you put $200,000 or $300,000 into it. You know, that's, you gotta know what you're doing. And then have you guys had any trainings on syndicates or anything like that?
No.
The syndicate is essentially you're going in and you're investing on a large scale. Talking about buying the A, B, or C class, but talking about maybe like if you think about a local townhouse community here, like that's a couple of rentals, right? That perspective, like that large condo building, it might be $20 or $30 million. Most of the time, people are not going to have the assets to do that. So we have essentially partners that bring in a large amount of cash, and they go in and you're investing as a silent investor. Typically, if you're starting investing, you're investing as a silent investor with the hope that they're adding value to this. And usually it's a short-term thing. Go in, the goal is in the 3 to 5 year period, they do the improvements, they raise the rents, and they sell it to another investor. Usually get paid on a dividend, and then when it actually sells out, it's time to sell the property in the long term. Why it's really attractive is if you are someone that can be considered in the eyes of the government as a real estate professional, all this. So you have a huge amount of tax advantages by going into things like syndicates because you can offset your income tax in a really big way. So the guy locally, many people getting into syndicates now. I'll go back to real estate school, young guy in his young 30s, very big into this. I've been invested in the class syndicate. Pretty interesting, especially from the tax perspective, to take advantage. I mean, he kind of famously said he hasn't paid taxes in 8 years because of him investing. Interested in trying to figure out how to offset that. Questions on any of these? So we're gonna find it. What do you find it?
I find a lot on Facebook.
Yeah.
Off market.
Okay.
Every MLS.
Okay.
MLS is tough now. Not that big a deal.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna get to one that I bought on the MLS like a year ago. I think you gotta look for discrepancy. Where things, I'll get to that example. And the majority of the properties I bought were MLS, but we're also talking about. And I think there's a large opportunity on the off market, I want wholesale.
Yeah. And the wholesale is another-
Yep. So does anyone know what a wholesale property is? Alright. So, you want to explain what a wholesale is?
They're just people who, basically go out there and find off-market deals, they make market, and pull those silly signs and buy houses. They buy them, and then how they make their money is they turn around, they find investors, and they make a market. I put a lot,
They're essentially flipping the property. So
yeah.
I go to Kathy, Kathy's got a house that she's willing to sell for me for 300, market value on the property is say 360, and then I go and, I choose to, sell it to someone at a $10,000 fee, right? So like, they're just putting themselves in there. Make sense?
They never actually close on it, right?
They never close on it. They typically will write sometimes they'll have a contract, sometimes they'll have an agreement. If they have a contract, the contract is, they can pretty much get out of it at any time. Terrible commitment. So a lot of times someone say, hey, I'll get rid of this property if you get me this price for it. And they say, hey, let me see if I can do that. So it's kind of like selling as a real estate agent off the market, but they're not, most of them are not licensed agents.
Mhm.
Does that all make sense? All right, so I'm just gonna get to, just kind of like the trajectory that I took, and what I kind of showed, like, it was, what I emphasize to investors is like, start off like, don't think you're gonna go buy an 8-unit property that needs substantial work, that's mixed commercial, like, that's just overwhelming. But just think about like, what's in your real, what is the market that you guys know really well, that maybe you can find an off-market property that someone comes to give you, come listening call, say, hey, maybe this is something that makes sense for us. And you'll see throughout, like, when I first started investing, I didn't really ask. Literally say to people, like, true, like, I didn't even know like furnace had a filter. Like, that's how you're gonna do it. Right? But I was dumb enough to just start doing it. So I think that's, fortunately, my naivety was like what even, allowed me to kind of think. Let's see the following. It's like 3 minutes. So this is actually where we used to live. What's really unique about this property is it's 2 houses on 1 lot. The front house where we had lived was actually known as the Workman's Cottage. And it's 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, all the living space in the upstairs. And then down below is just a basement / storage space. In the back is the house that we actually rented. And this is a 2 bedroom, 1 bath colonial home surrounded by a really great setting of the park and the patio, which really love. Right off the bat, I think both of us had a lot of trepidation about buying and being first-time homeowners and also first-time landlords. Because the day that we bought that house, we also have to rent the back house and really become landlords for the first time and deal with that responsibility. But from a financial standpoint, we could have tenants share the mortgage payments with us and allow us to buy more home than we would have been able to. Eventually, time came when we wanted to start a family, and we needed a place with a little bit more space. And that's when we found our future home. It was a 4 bedroom, 2.5 bath house that was just a half-mile away from our old house. The house was pretty bland. We needed some upgrades, but overall, fell out. Unfortunately for us, things didn't quite go in. Eventually, we got to the closing. I think for the sign until the next morning, but everything worked out. So the house was very functional, but it had no personality, and it was really why people weren't looking to buy this house. So after we settled in, we started starting with the kitchen. We retained. In total, we probably spent about $25,000. Whether baby girl, do it now. Yeah, I did the demo and we painted it, and I had a friend who helped us do the kitchen. But, so this is the first house we bought, so, I made every possible mistake on the first house. We called a listing agent, the first house we looked at. We looked at a few other ones that actually like, and I think, I'm convinced that she showed us the worst house that she could find, but this one looked that much better. It was, year wide was, December of 2005, going into 2006, the absolute like apex of the market, right? And, what else about it? I mean, I think that's pretty much the gist of it. It was totally turnkey, and I've been like recently like essentially split. There's a tenant in the front and the back was unrented. I share this just because it makes every agent cringe. So while we were under contract, the listing agent and the owners allowed us to have an open house for renting out the back house before we even owned it, which I can't imagine, like, guy would probably like in the like during this, but like, we didn't know any of that. Like, we didn't know that like you really shouldn't be, like, putting a renter into a house that you don't own and also be on a property in the house that like, all your contracts with, but like, it all worked out. So we lined up a renter right from the get-go. I freaked out because I didn't know what to do as a landlord, and we started like kind of figuring it out. But the fact of the matter is the house was completely turnkey. And what happened with the market was in 2007, market pretty much time. But what happened to the rents? Yeah, they went up substantially. Why'd they go up? There's things about it, people were nervous because they were scared at that
There's no
point. Because
value.
they were worried about what the market would do, or they were transitioning from jobs, and so you had a huge number of renters actually. Our rents on the property got dramatic. So the front house, which is what we ended up living in, that originally was renting for, when we bought it for $1,500, and we turned that over just 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, and we got tenants in there for $2,650. So, it's crazy to think about just, how rents can go up. That was just the one property. So yeah, so I mean, if I could do this over again, and I was 25 at the time, like my parents are very traditional, so they're like, hey, if you're gonna buy a house, you're gonna put 20% down. I wouldn't have done it. I would have put down 3.5, I would have put down 5%. Fortunately, at the time, we didn't have 20%, so I took a loan for 10% from my parents, but we paid them off super fast because we had tenants in the back paying for more than half of the property. We wouldn't have afforded a place that was, at the time, 500,000 or whatever. But we were able to buy that because we had a rent coming from. So it allowed us to kind of level up from the top.
Why would you not put 20% down?
I just think you have a really unique advantage when you're a first-time buyer, to put less down. And if you can do that, I mean, my goal would be to get that property, like, if you can, make improvements to it, or get the tenants in there. The moment that I can get 2 tenants in there that are close to offsetting, the cost of that property, I would take the money and move on. to something. Because the whole thing about this is the goal is to buy multiple properties, because we know that's what people are. So if I can do that quicker, as someone that's young, I would love to take that risk. Would I take that risk now in my mid-40s? No, but I always think the same thing with financial investing is like, as you talk to a financial advisor, what are they gonna say? They're gonna say, be more, aggressive when you're young and less risk averse as you get older, right? I think the same thing with real estate. Like, what's the worst thing that happens if you're 25 and think for some reason don't pan out? If you buy it right from the get-go and it should be a cash flowing property, you really can't, there's no risk there. But God forbid you lose your job and you can't get a tenant or something, can you start over at 25? Yeah, I think you can. I think you repair your credit. Am I doing that at 40? I feel a little bit more anxious to do that. Does that make sense? I mean, in an ideal world, if you could buy a 4-family, the lenders will allow you to go from a 4-family to a 3-family, to a 2-family, to a single family, and just continue to ladder up that. But lenders want, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to have a justifiable reason from moving from one property to the next. So
Yeah, you can't go from more than Newark.
yeah, and you can't go from Morris to Newark, and you can't go to a 2-family to a 4-family. It doesn't make sense. They don't want to tax that. The government wants to incentivize people to have home ownership. But if they're looking at it and saying, well, this person just trying to hack the system to get faster, they're not going to be inclined to allow you.
That is in fact probably the worst thing in mortgage and real estate 101 is occupancy fraud.
Yeah,
And there's numerous counts that people do that. They'll buy a house as FHA. And then even before the loan gets sold on post-closing, the underwriters and post-closing department will find on Zillow that the house that was supposed to be owner occupied is currently on Zillow to be rented, both units.
yeah,
So then it goes back to the lender to go back to the borrower. Either A, you have to refinance it into an investment property where they don't have the equity position in order to do so, or they have to sell the house.
right.
So,
Yeah, it's nothing to play around with. And I've had investors that have said to me, oh, yeah, well, wink, wink, you own it. And I'm like, I'm not representing. I'm like, not playing that. No, but it happens all the time. I mean, I know when I had my team, like, there's multiple people that tried this game, and I was like, we had a quick conversation. And document it. Look into it.
it's not hard to find out either.
Right.
People buying the houses think they're that smart, but there's other people have thought about it.
Right.
I think this house is very interesting. You bought it in 06 for 542.
Yeah.
And now you're saying the current value today is 580?
I mean, I think it's probably worth 6.25 now, but I haven't updated these.
I
all
think
that.
a lot of people with back end would be saying, well, you really didn't make any money on this house. But you've got 450,000 in equity because somebody else is paying for it.
Right, exactly. So my
2 units, that's like.
my point is, I want to start off with it. If you bounce this off to like investors, it'd be like, this is a terrible investment. Right,
It's not.
right, but like, my point is, over time,
Yeah.
like, real estate will take care of those like neophyte investment decisions that I made when I was 25 and I didn't know any, right? And so every investment I made was more attractive. I mean, right now, this property, I haven't updated the slide because it gets more complicated to change, but during COVID, I paid this property off. And the 2 rentals on it, yeah, I think we're at almost $5,000, right? So I called this the college house. And what I meant by that is like, when we bought it, we assumed we'd have it paid off before the kids go to college, like they're not going to college for another 9 years, so it's kind of 7 years. But like, now this house will pay for one of their years of college, like every year.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
And even though the value isn't necessarily, even just if this was true today, the value, you only made $40,000 in, what is it? Do the math from 22 minus 6, 14 years.
Right.
But look at all the cash you have. It's
Right.
crazy.
So question for you, it's $1,500 a month in cash flow. Did you pull equity out of the house?
Oh, because you didn't update it.
Yeah, so, well, now I pulled, yeah, actually, that's wrong, so I'm cash flowing more than that, but I pulled the equity out at this point, so now it's completely paid off. So like, all the only expenses I have on it is improvements to it and the taxes. So next one, And I think this house is hideous. My wife and I looked on the MLS and we didn't want to look at it. We were only looking at two areas. We were looking in Burnham Park where we were and another house. We wanted to have a family and stuff. And what happened with this house is it sat on the market and we looked at all the houses in the neighborhood. And one day we were down the shore. I can still remember being at my parents' like kitchen island and they dropped it like 40 grand. And I was like, oh, shoot. And like, it was purely a decision of like, we don't know, but we're like, it made sense for investments. Like, and the thing about this from a renovation standpoint, there was no question that you were gonna, so like, it was already built out in your minds what had to be done. Like the kitchen cabinets had door knockers on them. I'd never actually seen them.
My God.
Freaking- Like I was looking like you go buy a house and like, oh, I don't really like this kitchen, but it was remodeling 3 years ago. I'm like, well, don't remodel. Like, you're not gonna get a return on that. Like, this was like, I'm doing the bathrooms, I'm doing the kitchen, you kind of price that in, right? This was the first real estate transaction I ever did as a licensed agent. I'll tell you the book jacket version of it. I made the offer. I didn't know what I was doing. I was barely in the office because I was working full time. And I just was kind of winging things. Like I totally should not have been doing anything. But I got the offer accepted. And this is like a nice residential neighborhood, like $600,000-700,000 house. And I worked out with came to terms with it and the agent. And halfway through the process, I'm just kind of giving the book notes version. We rented out our house because we knew that closing was set up. So we rented out our property like 2 weeks later than when we buy this house because we wanted to just kind of keep the cash flow coming in. And they just didn't close. Like, and like, we're like, what's going on? I called the agent. He's like, the wife's an alcoholic, the son's a drug addict. Like, I'm out. I'm like, what do you mean you're out? Like, I'm like, now we're like hopeless because like we rented out our house, right? So all of our possessions are in a box truck, and I had moved back with my parents. And my wife was working in the city, so she moved in with her sister. And I said to him, I was like, what do you do? He's like, the mother and the son, I can't talk to him. I was like, isn't there another son involved? He's like, yeah. I was like, give me his number. I would call this guy every day for 10 days straight. Like we did the time of the essence letter, but like you can't, that gives him 11 days, right? And I called this guy every day. I was like, can you just help like move this along, right? Finally, we get to the walkthrough, right? So I was like the stage photo of my wife crying, but that was like legitimate. She was crying the day of closing because I didn't know you had to do a mission statement. That's how much I didn't know, right? So like, but you know, just kind of wing things, right? So my attorney called up like, where's your commission statement? I don't know what that is. And so I was doing that and I sent her to the walkthrough. Showed up. It looked like the house was just like a little old lady's kind of house before. It was kind of like neat and tidy. Walk through and just like boxes. Like it looked like boxes. It was like what like that in every room. Like everywhere. There was 11 people at the house between the movers and like friends trying to move out. The two brothers were screaming at each other in the top of their lungs in the backyard, and the mother was having a nervous breakdown. Like legitimately like shaking, nervous breakdown. Like we can't do this. I talked to the son, and like, listen, we'll clean out the rest, we'll figure it out. So what happens is we get to the attorney, our attorney's like, we're gonna hold the papers, tomorrow there's gonna be clean water. Closed, whatever, so they're screaming, they called it, they're like on the phone, they're screaming at each other. Because the mother and the one son owed $25,000 to the state because they both had DWIs. Didn't want to split it equally because why would you split equally if you didn't own $25,000 to the state? So they're all fighting about that. So, I mean, the tragic story is that, so we finally closed, everything worked out, right? But talk about like, you know, after that. But I talked to a neighbor next door, like, oh, you know what? And so the son, who was the drug addict, there's more to that. But he became an heroin addict. The mother was not alcoholic. It was like a totally normal thing. He was at Boston College. He was at Boston College, and the mother was a nurse at Morristown Memorial. The dad worked at Wall Street, and one day I had a bad day in the office.
Oh.
That was my first.
Oh.
So,
my God.
anyways, and
I want to say a statement about that. So this family was clearly in distress.
Yeah.
right? Like clearly in distress. And so often, some of the best deals, I hate to say it, there's distress.
Yeah.
There's something going on.
Yeah.
So when you're gonna find deals that are gonna be, in my opinion, really good potential moneymakers, they're not gonna be slide in and slide out because other people would have done that.
Right.
right?
So
How do people-
we needed wherever, and we needed to, like, we navigated, we had multiple offers on the house at that time. Anyway, so we finally got it, done, we did renovations as you saw, and with that property, we lived in it a few years, and then moved on to another house. So now we've rented that one out. The nice part about like the single family houses, what I didn't know is like, I felt guilty taking a good tip for people that are renting their own properties. Like, I felt guilty taking a commission to rent my own place out. But on the first tenant that we ever got, it was like corporate relo, and the agent's like, is like, hey, like, what's your commission? I was like, yeah, like, it's corporate relo.
It's paid for.
It's free money. And I've had like 2 different corporate reloads, and you have paid a commission for rent. So that's pretty great. So, moving on. So, after that, we found, this one's again, like a mile from the other property. So this was back in 2011, where you could throw a baseball and hit a house. That was a good real estate investment at that point. It was like the rates were super low. No one was buying property because it was absolute bottom of the market. That's it. And this was the situation where, similar kind of like in an oddly different distress situation. Like the husband was the one who bought the, multi families, and then the wife, he passed away, and then the wife had. But like she had them and just didn't know what to do with them, and like just did no work, like never changed the rents, like just pretty much ignored them. And like that was, I think she had her agent go in and rent them out when she needed to flip them over, but that was pretty much it. So in this scenario, it was like a weird thing. Instead of doing the highest and best, the agent was like, oh, what do you want to offer? I forget what it was. Like, I'll offer 290. They're like, okay. And they're like, oh, we got another offer, it's at 300. I was like, okay. They're like, now you want to do 305? I'm like, okay. And then she calls back, she's like, oh, well, we got another offer, and the other at 310. And I'm like, all right, I'm like, tell me the other buyer. And they're like, oh, he's a first time buyer. And you know, I was like, he doesn't know anything. I was like, I'm out. I was like, call me when if it doesn't work out. 2 weeks later, I got a call. He went to the inspection, and he saw like how much work needed to be done. And I was like, yeah, it was pretty obvious, right? So this one needed a ton of work. And so are renters good people? Is it good to have renters on when you go look at property? 100% yes.
Yeah.
Because they will tell you everything. They will throw the landlord under the bus, some party. I get so frustrated with clients that, you know, have tenants in, and they're like, oh yeah, just show it whenever. I'm like, no, like your tenant has no upside to show the property. Like, what's the upside? They have to have random people come in the house constantly for a place that they rent, that they should like try to, you know, tidy up. It's a total inconvenience. And what do they know? Either they're gonna get possibly kicked out once the lease expires, or the next landlord's gonna bump the rent, right? So they're the first ones to tell you everything about the house. So the guy who lived upstairs, his name was Bill, he'd been in the house for 8 years. I think he's been in the property since I bought it. So what is that? So he's been in this house for almost 20 years, right? And so Bill had 3 cats and was a smoker. Is that a good tenant to have? That's a great one.
No money.
Right, because where's school gonna go? Like, I don't want to take a guy with 3 cats and a smoker. Like, does it already smell?
Yeah.
Do I know it smells up front? You're like, am I gonna really do anything about the smell? No, it's already there. Like, I know what I'm buying, right? So I talked to him and I said, hey, Bill, like, we're gonna bump your rent because like you haven't had rent change in like 6 years. I'm like, what do you think about remodeling this? Like, I want to keep my rent low. I'm like, okay. I was like, what do you want? He's like, I need a new stove. I'm like, all right, I'll split the cost for you. Okay, great. So like that's the only thing we changed. Right? And so downstairs we did a full renovation, and I think this is actually the upstairs, but they look at that. And so a couple moves in, and they're there for a year and a half. Like my ideal tenant in Morristown is a couple that play house. And what I mean that is they move in together, they're not married yet. It's great, they play house, they like go on HDV, they're like, hey, can I paint this room? And I'm like, can we see the color? Like, sure, go for it. They make the places even nicer, they do improvements to them, and that's kind of like the model I have. They live there for like a year and a half. I sell them a house because I talk to my tenants and I say, hey, I'm a real estate agent. If you ever want to add a lease, just let me know. We'll show you a house at the moment that you close, we'll just end the lease that day and you're not paying additional to it. So they're happy because they don't have to stress about it. Because otherwise it's like, oh, I got 2 months that I have to pay to break my lease, all this other stuff. And I'm like, not a jerk. So like, they're okay with that. So I've sold multiple houses to tenants. So anyway, they move out. I call Bill, hey, Bill, there's activity over there because they're moving out. He goes, hey, like, what do you rent that for? I'm going to rent for your ticket. Yeah, I'm gonna rent it, I'll rent it to you tomorrow for 17. Great. So he moved downstairs, and I know that's a great move because I know him and we get along well, and I'm gonna renovate the other one. So do I want a new tenant in when I'm doing full reno? Well, not really, because, you know, I can see them being upset about it. I know he's really chill. And so he moved downstairs, and he like called me up 2 months later. He's like, and I said to him, at this point, he only had one cat, two of them. And I moved downstairs, but like, there's no upstairs, didn't have any outside space, the downstairs, can't smoke inside. And, at this point, I don't know whether cat. So he called me up 2 months later. It's absolutely life changing. He's like, everything in my life is better. So the place was like in shambles. Now it looks exactly like it does in the photos. It's like neat, tidy. Like I was in there just doing some, a little basic repair a couple weeks ago. It's like, so he was like, it was absolutely been great. He's like the super. Anytime it comes up, he calls me. And he's still, but I mean, the difference is you're seeing how this like momentum happens, right? The first one is completely turnkey. I didn't know what I'm doing. I'm learning to deal with it. Second one, needs a renovation, and so we learned how to do the renovation. First one, we do a full renovation, and we're doing the rent, right? Who here's sold the short sale?
Well, what?
A short sale?
Yeah.
Was it really fun? That's super quick, right?
Yeah.
That was totally logical and made lots of sense throughout. And it was like really.
Responded.
Really.
Yeah.
I found this deal on the MLS after I showed it to three separate clients who would buy it. So that's what, like, I just think it's funny when people are like, where did you get these deals? You're an agent. Like, I showed it to three clients. I couldn't convince them to buy it, so I convinced my wife to buy it. And so it was a short sale with 3 liens on it, right? So like, if you're familiar with short sales, like the more liens, the more unlikely that it's ever gonna close, right? So this house was one where there was like mold in the basement because it had been vacant for like a year. Weird, I mean, aesthetically just not terrible. I know that half mile from the downtown in Morristown on a cul-de-sac, a half-acre lot, 3,700 square feet. So like, there's a ton of potential there, but like things that would scare people off don't scare me off because they can just, we're agents, right? Like we should know what things cost, and we should know people that do them pretty effectively. And we're also smart about it. So I brought in an inspector. I was like, I don't need a report because it's a bank loan anyway. So I was like, can you just walk this with me and tell me what I'm missing? And maybe point out 1 or 2 things. So there wasn't anything more than I had. And so you just, you know, a lot of it was just the cosmetics, right? So like in the backyard, it was odd because there's a stream that goes through the back. And we own the property on their side of the street, so we built a bridge and built like extended the property that way. We're at the bathroom. The downstairs photo was taken about 2 hours ago because that's my house getting torn up right now, and that's why I smell like a little stain from wood flooring right now. You know, we're actively renovating it now. But the thing that was interesting about the short sale, so it was listed for 690, right? And I knew the listing agent, it's a bank approved price at 690. But bank approved means like if you've done a short sale, like they don't respond, so it might respond like 4 months later. And by that time, the buyers moved on. So that's what happened, right? So they made it a bank approved price at 690, and so we make an offer for 670. And he's like, "What? You're really trying to like lowball this?" Like, what the hell? It's been vacant for 4 more months since they got this other offer. So what? How does the bank respond? What's the number you come back?
690.
740.
Oh, price went up.
If you done short sales, right?
No.
So like totally alive. Some people are, I mean, we will have short sales. I mean, maybe I haven't seen one, I haven't seen many recently, but if you take logic and reason, throw it out the window, like you're just barely starting to work with the short sales. And so my wife's all upset. She's like, "Oh, maybe we should counter this." I was like, "There's no logic or reason." So I write this letter, and I'm like, "There's mold, there's like hole in the furnace that's like I put CO2 in the carbon monoxide in the house, all these other things." And their attorney responds back immediately. He's like, "Yeah, we'll catch you on the next one. This, you know, this is dead." And I'm like, my wife's like, this is like on a Thursday. We go through the weekend. She's like, "Well, what do we do? Change the offer, this, that, and the other thing." I'm like, "Well, what do we change the offer? Like, what's the number that even makes sense?" On Monday morning, an email, "The bank will take your price at 670. We need to close in 30 days. It's like, but like the thing is, I mean, again, the thematic here is like, you gotta go through like a little pain and all. Like that's like, you're not gonna find the easy low hanging fruit deals that are like totally renovated, you know, 20% below market. Like that just doesn't happen. Like you have to look at this from a financial standpoint and say, all right, well, I'm gonna have to roll my sleeves and kind of do what you can. Have to profit on the back end. So, I mean, this house, I sold the house catty corner to it last, 2 months ago for 1.125, and that was 1,000 square feet less than our house and now ours. Again, it's just like buying property and holding on over time. So, yeah, we bought this in like 5 years ago, so that was right before the market really started showing. Morristown got really hot at that point, and so it was, they actually had offers behind ours, but Morristown was equally similar offer.
Did you rent that or you?
No, I wouldn't. And so, anyone have a property that they got called to list and they wish they bought?
Almost all of them.
So this one was, again, it was like kind of like a come list me call, like I didn't know what was up and it was weird, like the house looks strange, right? It's 2 front doors. It was because it was like it was like a home chiropractic office, like, like we see a lot more, but now like all the big health companies are just taking those over. And so, I went and met with them and they're like, and it was really weird because we had the 70s chiropractic stuff in the house. There's like things that would be totally turn off all buy, like all buyers, right? So I mean, only an investor buy it. And I said to them, was like, hey, I think I got this stuff out of there. I think we need to get the photos done. Like we don't have to do improvements, but like let's clean it up and we'll take it from there. And she was like, what's the number to like sell it in like a week? Here's the number. She's like, okay. So she's like, well, when can we get it listed? I was like, well, I'd like to put on like, meet with her on like, let's say Friday. I was like, I'd like to put on like next Thursday so we get our photos done, we can get the write-up done, right? Like, can you sell it this weekend? I'm like, can I get back to you on this? Right? So I go home and I was like, this woman like wants to sell like yesterday. Like there was immediacy that like I have to sell this. But I said, my wife, like it's like not even a mile from our house. Like we can improve it, and I think it would be a great little rental property. And all right, so I go back to, I talk to my disclosure here, talk to your broker about this, make sure they understand how you're going forward as an investor and not an agent. Talk to your broker and make sure you're doing something. So anyway, I talked to them, I was like, hey, what's the number? He said, this was the number that we're listed for. Can we do 6% less? Because that was the commission. So I want a little more. I think it came up $5,000. They actually moved a lot of stuff out, so a lot of the work out of that. Anyway, and we closed in 30 days to move forward. But the kitchen actually was in good shape. Hardwood floors were fine. We could renovate those. We turned the chiropractic office into, I was going to use it as a personal space, and I just haven't yet, so I actually leverage that. So kind of long. But, anyway, so we have it rented. The thing about that one was, I only found out the woman who was selling it was the executrix for her brother. She was not mental capacity to run it anymore. So she just wanted it sold immediately because he had an inoperable growing brain tumor that he was going crazy. And at the same time, he was divorced, but his ex was trying to sign over the documents to her before he passed away, so she could like steal much of his estate. So my client was like, I want this closed as quickly as possible before she can like try to steal it from him. And so like going back to the fact is oftentimes maybe we think about all people are driven by is the money, but sometimes it's just peace of mind and nervous. Like she was dealing with so many bigger things about her brother dying, various other properties and business, that like this was just a check. Like we did in 30 days. She was like, I'm so happy to be done. This was so seamless. Thank you guys a million times over. She's like, say what I think. So we renovated it. Again, it's just a single family rental. It's turnkey. Everything that we renovate is the same kind of model, so it's like white subway tile, basic stuff. So,
Can I add something, John?
yeah,
And for all the agents, these are ways like we were talking about the renovation loan, where people could actually do this as their primary.
Yep.
Fix the place up for 3.5% down, be on their way, use this as a rental property. And these are clients that if you do 5, 10 of these are clients that you have longevity forever.
Yeah.
So they're gonna keep buying and buying and buying.
Right.
These are perfect
yeah,
opportunities.
and we show people how to build wealth.
100%.
Yeah, but I mean, on the flip side of that, like the other thing I emphasize is like, look at when you go to list a property, look and say, should I be? Because I think so often we as agents are like, because initially I was just like, here's the number to sell this, and then like, she was like the one who was like, let's sell it today. I'm like, I was like, who do I know that could buy this? And I was like, oh, wait, me, right? Like, you know, there's so many people out there to say, you know, if there's a good deal, Kathy was the first one to say this, if there's a good deal, call me, right? Like, I tell people, if there's a good deal, I'm gonna buy it, and if it's an okay deal, I'm happy to be called. Like, my point is, like, I wanna let people know, I wanna be an investor, like, and I want that mindset, right? Like, you know, I think that's not a bad thing, right? Like, I mean, we think about, you know, when it comes down to the business, who do I care most about? Like, no offense to my clients, I care most about my family and my kids. Most of the time, investors are kind of unemotional. Right? I'm not taking a house away from someone that wants to live in it. It's like, we're always looking at the numbers. So the numbers are good enough. Like, look at it. Look at you buying it. If it's great, like, go to someone else in the office that you might want to partner with and say, hey, maybe I don't have the numbers to come up with this, but like, bring a deal to someone else. And, you know, having small pieces of pie is still, you know, better than having no pie at all, right? And maybe you'll learn too. Right. So, I mean, just, I think it's, you know, I think Gary Keller was talking about land, right? But think about like, just, you know, just make it this year that you're gonna buy one investment, right? Like, just make that, like, you know, and I think we talked about in this market, is it really hard to find listings? You know, are you gonna have a successful year if you don't sell 10 listings this year? Probably, but like, what if you just find one investment property, right? That sounds impossible. No.
Something else you just said is very important too. You said you use white subway tag. Like, you can't go in and do all the trendy stuff because we're then owning all the trendy stuff for you, you know, and it looks trendy.
Yeah, the mistake on our first kitchen renovation was that looks like that dairy cabinet that everyone did in 2010.
Yeah.
So, like when I did my kitchen just recently, I was like, what can we do that's gonna be like more timeless? Because in like 20 years, I want to run it. Like, yeah, we did white cabinets, but we like did a wood island. I'm like, do I love like the white, but I'm like, I don't want to get too trend and do like, you know, blue. So you get at it. This is one property we flipped. This was a wholesale. And in the case where this guy was, he totally one of these, I buy ugly houses type. It's not that franchise, but essentially it's he just had too many properties at one time. And this was on the market and then came off of the bankruptcy situation. And we had a client, he went and just came across it, and it was off market. And I was like, hey, show it to this client. And the guy on my team showed it, and he was like, yeah, he doesn't want it, but if I could buy it, I'd buy it. Tell me more. And so I went to go look at it. Numbers made sense. Like 140,000 up in Mount Arlington. We blew off the back of it. And what I did was I was super busy with the real estate business at that time. The business was really shining. And I partnered with my contractor. And so I said to the contractor, I said, hey, let's do this. I was like, I don't have the time to be working on this. I was like, well, I'll work with the architect and help make some design stuff. But you do all the work to it. I'll buy it cash. I'll sell it. And you do all the work. And you buy all the materials, you get split the profit. What was great about that is he like buddied up with the contractor desk at Lowe's and they were just unloading stuff. And he's like, I damaged sheetrock and you buy $1 sheet, you know, a tub that they need off the floor because they have too many of them, $50. Like, so he was conscious about buying things for cheap because he was in bed with me on the profit. So otherwise, he would just go to Home Depot with my credit card, just buy everything and just be like, make it super simple. But now he's like, whatever I save, I get to save too, right? And so with that one, we ended up buying it for 140. We put in like 61 grand, I think was the materials that went into it. Labor he didn't charge for because that's part of the deal that we had. And then we both got $77,000.
You both got $77,000.
Yeah, I mean,
Do you get this all in writing, go through an attorney, or is it like shake
I would
hands?
like to say
Here's the deal.
that's probably right. But in the real world, I don't think people like, I mean, the fact that we both had, I'm all in it for the cash, like, he's putting his money forward.
Mhm.
You gotta have a trust there, right? Like, because even if we wrote it all up, what's it gonna do, right?
And it wasn't
Start
something
seeing
you
each
did
other?
not, it was something you could.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a bunch of work to make for over the years. Like, I wouldn't just do it from random contractor, on
Okay.
phone, like, off, yellow pages. And this one we didn't hold on to just because from a rental standpoint, it was further away from where I lived and it just wasn't gonna be great from a rental standpoint, so. And I also didn't, to your point, I was just happy to get the profit because I didn't know how to separate that and buy them out and then market value that.
Mhm.
That way. But I didn't have to put a lot of work into it because he was the one managing it.
Nice.
So, and then, So this is the one that we did most recently. So, this is a 2001 bath house is listed in the MLS. But it was 2,000 square feet in the tax rec, or it was listed as 2,100 square feet for the, upstairs apartment. So the apartment has 2 bedroom, 1 bath, and then there's things below. So it was like, it was weird. And the MLS is a 2 bedroom, 1 bath. But does that look like a 2 bedroom house?
Yeah.
Right, so, the downstairs happened to be just completely open, right? So, I called the agent, I said, hey, what's the deal with this? Like, has your client ever looked into making this a multifamily? She's like, well, it's actually zoned as, mixed use commercial. And I was like, so it's already mixed use commercial, which is great, because going single family, multifamily, they're not gonna be too excited about that in most towns, right? But going from mixed use commercial to a 2 family, that might be better, and essentially where this was, because this is a residential neighborhood. So the owner he was a firefighter, and he had like a t-shirt shop, but he really didn't do it, it was just like a workshop, right? And so, and it happened to be that the seller was the mayor of, had been the previous mayor in Roxbury, years, 2007. And, so I made an offer, I said, hey, if we can get this approved as a 2 family, I'll pay, it was like, I think I ended up making an offer 10,000 below list or something. And I'll pay $5,000 for the attorney fees, and you guys will split the cost of the attorney fees. And if it goes through, I'll buy it no matter what, and if it doesn't go through, I have the option to not. And they're like, okay, because they already talked to the town, he was the previous mayor, and he's like, I think this is a home run. So I happen to know the Board of Adjustment attorney too, who would be the person we go in front. Like, hey, Larry, how's it going? We talk about Rutgers, he's an old guy that I've known for a long time. And I was like, I hope I'm not out of line here, but I'm thinking about doing this. If I would be going before the board, do you think this would be a good bet? He's like, yeah, I think you got yourself a home run. So I already do my due diligence. So I put a $5,000 bet out that I thought I'd get paid on. And sure enough, we go to the Board of Adjustments. They give you a whole list of things that you. Ultimately, the moment that we got the agreement, then I was going forward and purchasing it. Now, the tricky part was because we were changing use on it, I couldn't get a loan on it because now I'm going and switching it, so I can't get a single family loan and I can't get a 2 family loan. I can't get a commercial loan because I'm changing use in the process. So this I had to buy cash, but the moment that I was able to be a multifamily house, the value of it went through the roof. And no longer was it 2 bedroom, 1 bath. Now it was going to be two 2 bedroom, 1 bath, right? So then, and the basement space was completely open, so it was like super easy renovation because it was just one big blank slate, which already had plumbing there for a half bathroom. So we went in and we saved cost by doing like exposed HVAC to make it kind of look like a loft in Hoboken or Jersey City, which you'd never see this in Roxbury, but we got premium rent because it looks nicer than the traditional kind of colonial what the upstairs looked like. Kind of looked like the first kitchen that we had done. So, that was the really kind of a nice turnkey one. And now we're renting, we got $4,000 of rent on it, which was previously renting for like 1,800.
So you paid cash, did you refi it?
No, I just kept it.
You just kept it, so it's all.
I mean, so this would be a perfect example for like a burn model, right? So you buy, renovate, rent, refi, and then repeat, right? So if I wanted to on this, I could have literally taken all of my cash out, made a profit, and then actually just own the house out because the numbers were that good. So to Kathy's point, it's really hard to find these on the MLS unless someone's not looking at it the right way, right? So this was on there and people were looking at it as a 2 bedroom, 1 bath, which was probably an okay price for it. It wasn't great, but once it was a 2 family, the numbers are, it should have been $100,000, right? So that's the thing is like most agents aren't investors. So unless you're looking at things the right way, so like there might be areas that are in your market that it might be a Cape Cod that's practically a tear down, but it's in a zone that could be a multifamily. So I'm like, all right, that's a lot more attractive because you're going to do a tear down anyway. But if you can turn it into a 2 family or a 3 family or a 4 family, well, that's a different thing that most people wouldn't know, right? So just things like that, right? And so like, would I have been able to do this property at first? Of course not, because I wouldn't have had the cash to do it. I used a line of credit. And I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to think about converting uses, right? So like, as things get more complicated and a little bit more tricky, the returns get so much, more fantastic throughout the process, right? Like if you're buying a place cash because no one else can buy it, well, because maybe it's not habitable, you've eliminated everyone who's an end user that could be there. If you're competing with end users, it's gonna be really hard to find a margin. But if you're only competing with investors, even in this market can be tight, but you're eliminating a lot of those that are competing. Make sense? Questions, thoughts, concerns? So what, you wanna talk about financing on this? Take the slides to you instead of me talking about it?
But I think just as being in the real estate sometime, and even myself, we get so focused on what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Right, we forget about all these nuances that are opportunities for not only ourselves, but our clients. So like you said, Jeremy, like there's other opportunities that people just cannot see. Right, so like you're talking about the things that you're renovating. Not too many agents are actually pushing the renovation loans. Like the 203Ks are finding someplace, it's been on the market for, 60, 90, well, not 90 days, but 30 to 60 days. Because there's issues with it. But if you're looking at it and presenting it to the client in a specific way, right? It could be their primary residence for the next 12 months, and then they're gonna rent it and then go on to the next property. There's a lot of investors that, we have these programs with the 15% down. To buy some of these investment properties. So there's tremendous opportunity. They're not the best interest rates. Granted, they're probably double digits. But at the end of the day, if you're getting what you need to obtain the property, either buy, fix, flip, whatever you're gonna do with it, there's tremendous opportunity with these creative financing things that we all have to think outside the box.
Doesn't matter if it's 10% interest if it's not, because the tenant is covering it, who cares?
The numbers are the numbers, and as an investor, it matters.
And I think the other thing is too, I think now the opportunity to look at the property model along the way within the winter. And it's just because that's when a lot of the buyers aren't out there, and you can find those properties that have been on the market for 30, 60 days that you're talking about. And they're gonna be more willing to negotiate price, because they realize that they're now gonna have to go through the full winter and then competing with the new properties in the spring. And from a secondary standpoint, then you can start looking at these properties that get on the market from the sense of doing, building on the financing for a 130K and show with the vision of what these properties could actually be.
And I think that's something that I've been working on, but it's very costly to take somebody's listing and do it before and after.
Yeah.
Because what I'm finding now is like everybody wants immediate gratification, right? Like you gotta put your blood, sweat and tears in it. Otherwise, everybody else would be doing it, right? So let's say a $350,000-$400,000 house around Lake Mohawk. It might only be 2 bedrooms. There's a way that we could think like, we could add another bedroom, we could blow the roof out. All right, this might cost $125,000, but I can tell you from other comps, being an expert in this area, this thing could be worth $550 when we're done. Are you willing to take this leap? Is it a lot of work? Yeah, nobody wants to, because we're not gonna get paid for 90 days, and then the contractor, and then collaborating this whole thing. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
But that's what we have to do it.
But this is the way we gotta get creative, because otherwise we're all chasing the same thing that everybody else has the same ideas about.
Yeah, and I think like the Cape Cod that we did the flip on, it was like such a straightforward renovation, because we were just like, the dormer at the back, like we turned this little 2-bedroom house into a 4-bedroom, 3 bath, because we had the basement like renovate. Like, you look at this property, and you're like, this is pretty straightforward, right? It's like, we're looking at someone who looks at a buy level, and they say, well, this isn't so great, but it's like, every buy level has a wall between the dining room and the kitchen. That's not a load bearing wall. You can start showing people, oh, you want the open kitchen floor plan? We can take this out. You're probably looking at an $80,000 renovation, but like now look at this comp versus the one that was totally turnkey that sold for $650, and we're looking at $450.
And the only way I would never, and again, I don't put my beak where it doesn't belong to rain on an agent's presentation. But the number one thing is, you have to find out what their game plan is as far as, do they have a lease that's coming due? Are they getting thrown out? Do they have to leave in 30 days? Don't even bring it up. Like, no matter what we do, we can't fix their current situation. But if they're like, oh, I'm living with mom and dad, or, I'm on a month to month, what better opportunity is now? Because you're competing in an arena that nobody else could even think about, because we're being creative.
And you're
I think that's
leveraging all the money that's going into part. They're not gonna come in and be able to put down 10% and also another $100,000.
Right.
But if they pull into the loan, why wouldn't you?
Do you use the same, a relationship with a contractor that you use with the property?
I've used a whole bunch of contractors.
That's one of the things that-
Contractors is,
That scares
it's an
me.
arduous process.
With, I've had just clients, friends that, working with contractors, you always hear these horror stories, so that's one of the things that kind of
makes me pause and I think of, because I don't know, it's fun, so I was just curious. if you-
Well, I often start with like, you don't want to be doing full renovation.
Right.
You know, it's tricky to take that leap on the full renovation. A lot of people agree, hey, one of them is after that. And the contractors are doing it for the foot pay loan typically are more buttoned up because there's more process that's doing. Have bigger companies that are doing it more versus high by night kind of operations.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would always say that like, you know, in my experience, it's always building up is really good value of the building. I mean, because that renovation can be, you know, it can be a kitchen renovation or doing a full bathroom, it doesn't have to be, you know, very nice.
That's a difficult topic too for all, you know, agents. You get what you pay for. If you want somebody with an admin that's gonna have the paperwork and the insurance back within 24 hours, email, button up, working with the consultant, 1, 2, 3, the numbers are gonna be probably 20 grand, 20% higher than they would the guy who's just going job to job. So I tell you, I got 3 or 4 going at any given time, and working with the contractors is a nightmare trying to get back the paperwork in time with the insurances and vetting them. But
Yeah,
again,
you have to get. You have to make sure
yeah,
you-
yep,
they don't.
Yeah, and I say, what?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
yeah. It's,
Yeah, so much of that going on. Right?
so, you know, it sounds crazy because like, would I ever recommend a contractor? I'd be kind of reluctant, then I'm like, wait a minute, real estate agent refers me, maybe they feel the same way. Like, if you don't call somebody back or you're not on the jiffy, how does that make us look to the buyer? Right, you know, your guy didn't call me back, so, you know, he disappeared for 3 days, he can't bring me back to people. Okay. These are all things we gotta take into consideration, because the end result, the numbers are the number. You know, so,
You go maybe diving back in.
Yeah.
So what I talking about, so here's the biggest thing that I want to emphasize is often meeting is the mining, right? So foremost, we see the properties first, right? So if we have investor clients I'm working with, who get calling to get CMA values? They're calling us, right? Like we are marketing. It's like, should we know the rental market in the areas that we're working? 100%. So like all the time I see multifamilies online that the rental numbers are just totally off. Like they're either way too high or way too low, or I can't tell you how many times the net operating income makes absolutely no sense. Like I have a meetup that I run out of Morristown most time. And I did this exercise where I handed out things for people to analyze properties. And I tripped up a bunch of them because they looked at this and they said, oh, well, you know, this one never looks at that. Well, the agent never actually added the taxes into the net operating. Like, so like, there was no net for the expense. So like, you have the expense ratio and it's like, well, you didn't, like, how could it be that like the expenses are less than the tax? Well, they never put the taxes in it, right? So like, these are the things that we can kind of look at and realize because there's sometimes you might be finding a property that's like more, that's where I'm from. It's a 2-bedroom renting for $1,500. And like, good luck finding a 1-bedroom for $1,500. But like, if the agent's there and just doesn't like work in the investment phase, like find these opportunities just by being a market expert, right? The other thing is you get paid to buy a property. Like how great is that? You get paid 2.5% to buy a house. Like when I bought this short sale, I put in another agent in because I heard the bank would push back and say, you're double dipping as a buyer. So be smart about it. So maybe you have a partner or something like that if you're concerned that they're gonna push back on you getting commission, but most of the time that's not an issue. And then when it comes to people are like, oh, well, is it hard being a landlord? Like, do we do rentals as agents? Yeah, so like when I have a tenant move out, they're like, I'm like, what's the big deal? Like I've already done it on the MLS, I've already have professional photos taken, I've already done the write up. I'm literally going there and just keeping like active again once they tell me they can start showing it and I put a lock on it. Right? And I often do all the photos before I put a tenant in there, because one thing I don't know if ever gonna know is like, even if a tenant has an 800 credit score and they make $250 a year, they can still be a slot, right? So if I have those beautiful photos from when it was totally vacant or when the tenants who had beautiful stuff in there at the stage, then a renter can look at that and say, this is what it can look like, right? And the same thing with renting a car and renting a house. People are much more forgiving in the sense of like finding a property they know is gonna be short term, right? So, and then you have relationships with, you know, you should be referring attorneys, you should be referring inspectors, like, you should be like getting a payoff from that perspective. If you have an attorney that you sent 20 clients to this year, and he's not willing to do your closing for free, go get a hired new attorney. And you're probably, if I know most agents, you're not getting referrals from this attorney anyway, right? And same with an inspector. Am I expecting to get lots of clients from my inspector? No, but I am expecting if I'm going to do an inspection on my own house, that it's giving me a free. Right? Does that all make sense? Am I like asking too much for that? Right, so I promise you, I didn't ask any of them. They're like, hey, you know, this is from me. Like, it's kind of like, they're the ones offering. So a regular investor, they buy a house for 300,000, right? And they sell for 500. The inspections costing them, these numbers are like very low. So let's say it's 500, it should be probably 750 plus. Tank Suite 300, attorney on the buy sells $2,800, and then you have a commission for 25,000. It's a cost of 28,000 for that active investment, right? But what about the agent investor side? So first off, you bought the place, so you made $7,500 when you bought it. Cool, right? You're already ahead of the game. Your inspection, hopefully, if you're buying, most of the time I do my inspectors, if like, I know this place is foreclosure or something like that, like, I'm just gonna be like, walk the property. I don't need to report too much, I do anything to report. I'll have you write up a letter if there's something catastrophic. Tank Suite, same thing, attorney in the buy sell should be fine there. We're paying a commission, right? We're gonna pay 2.5%, if you don't, I'll beat you up. And then you're walking out of this with a cost of 5,000. So if you find this deal, right, you go on, you go to a come list me call tomorrow, and you don't have the money to buy this property, well, maybe you have someone that, you know, you can partner in the sense of like, hey, I'm gonna save us 25 grand by you involving me in the property, and I brought this property to you. And I'm gonna handle the marketing and selling of it, so make me a partner on this property, right? So like, let me be a partner on the property. Right? You learn something through the experience, or it's a buy and hold. You want it for one. That makes sense. Cool. And the other thing is like, why shouldn't you guys be limited? Only 7% of tax filers are actually owning investment property. And the average person is owning less than 2 units. So the people that are owning properties, you know, maybe as a couple that got married and they had 2 properties, maybe they got something that was an inheritance, like they're not actively going out and finding properties, but if you're able to find just a few properties, the payoff on this is dramatic. So it's not these big corporations that are the ones that are owning properties. It's usually just the mom and pops that are picking up properties all along the way. So, and who should be doing that is people that are literally doing this as a profession, right? Like, you know, is it hard to be a real estate investor if you're a dentist in management? Like, it's not your wheelhouse, like 100% in our wheelhouse. Like another rental is not the end of the, you know, not a big deal. Okay? I'm not gonna go into numbers because we've kind of over on time, but like, what I want to kind of emphasize to you guys is like, it really comes down to the difference between, and I said this at the beginning, of you owning a stock and you owning real estate. Stock, and you're buying 100% out of it. You get a stock, you get a dividend. As the market goes up, you get that, and you get some appreciation on that. We don't have any control on the stock, right? So like, if I go buy Amazon tomorrow and, you know, and it shows up in the news that Jeff Bezos is, you know, I don't know, white supremacist or something in the market, I can't do anything about that, right? But I can look at my market and I can do insider trading on real estate. Like I can look and see where someone put the rentals in their home, or someone put the net operating income too low. Like I can exploit the market because I can do my own insider trading. There's nothing illegal. Like if I know that Jeff Bezos, there's a news story that's gonna break tomorrow, and I know something through his network of people, I can't trade on that. That's illegal. But in real estate, I certainly can. Like, nothing wrong with that. So we look at this, you know, from the standpoint of over time, you're looking at the power of leverage. When does your initial investment change from what you do to purchase property?
No.
Right, you're putting 20% down, and that doesn't change, right? Let's say it's 20%. Right? What's the only thing that can change? Like your taxes, right? Like when your taxes change dramatically, typically not, right? They're not going out, they're not going crazy. But over time, what are we doing as well with the mortgage? Or let's say with the tenant, what's happening? You're paying it down, right? So you're getting the equity from appreciation, right? Your initial investment staying the same. And over time, you're paying the mortgage. Just say we're owning just a house, right? This is why people, 70% of their net worth is in their house, because they're just paying it down over time. Like depreciation's happening and they're paying it down. So when they're paying the principal, can they touch the principal tomorrow? Well, not easily, unless they do cash out refi or a home equity line of credit, but they have that money there, it's there in the house, right? That all makes sense. So if we're looking at it from a tenant standpoint, you know, what are your costs? You have to repair the property. I usually take a 1% rule, so whatever the value of the property is, 1% is what I put towards knowing that I'm gonna have to do maintenance on the property, if that's roof or replacements or, you know, repairs, whatever that might be, AC. Over time, you're gonna have to address this, right? My debt service is staying the same until I actually pay off the loan. And my cash flow, what's gonna happen with cash flow? Over time, again, these are like federal numbers, single family home rentals have never gone down. Literally never gone down. So is it possible they go down? Sure, but for the last 70 years, they've never gone down. So again, you know, you have multiple ways that this is benefiting. The other part that's not even coming up is your taxes, which are dramatic, right? So we talked about the first property I bought. They said, you know, that was a terrible time to buy it because it was 2006. But this is looking at that 2006 time frame, right? So the market, the bottom dropped out, right, which is the blue slide. But what happened to rents? Actually climbed up pretty dramatically. So if we look at this from a long-term perspective, between 2006 and 2012, home prices dropped 18%, but rental prices grew by 50%. So if you're looking at this from a long-term perspective, I'm going to buy and hold. Should you be concerned about if the market drops out? No, as long as you bought it right from the get-go. If you didn't buy it right, you're hoping that appreciation is going to happen, hoping that rents are going to go. Yeah, that's a dangerous, tenuous place to be. But if you buy it right from the get-go, you're going to be in pretty. What's the thing we hear about in the news more than anything right now when it comes to politics and the economy? Well, inflation, right? So if we're looking at inflation, how it rise typically right along with inflation. There's only been 2 decades where inflation outpaced home appreciation, and that was in the 80s by 0.1%, and that was in the 2000s by 0.3%. I mean, so you're not talking about massive percentages. Is it a good hedge against inflation? 100%. Like, we as real estate investors hope inflation happens because it drives real estate pricing up. And because we're leveraged, it's driving it up, not by, you know, if we're putting 20% down and the home prices are going up because of inflation, we're only owning 20% of it. We're getting the payoff on the other 4 times of that, right? Does that all make sense? Yeah, no. Yeah. So, I mean, this is the wheel of the value really comes down. You're gonna have the appreciation, you know, over time. Historically, we've had about 6% appreciation. You have the cash flow. Hopefully, you're buying the property with cash flow on the upfront, right? You get the debt pay down because it's just happening naturally. You're paying your mortgage. You're paying down the debt, right? Over time, you're paying down more and more because usually the inflation, interest is all upfront, and then you have the tax benefits. So you have depreciation. So in the government's eye, over a 27.5-year period, they believe that your house is not the land, but the improvements on the property go to 0. So you're depreciating this property on an annualized basis. In the eyes of the government, it's worth less, even though it's appreciating at the same time and you're making more money off. Does that make sense? I don't really know, but it's certainly great to have property. And there's other things that we talked about, you know, you guys can look into this more, what's called accelerated depreciation, which allows you to kind of take all those advantages on the upfront, and you can't take all the advantages. You continue to take them on multiple years. That's how Kyle Kovacs hasn't paid taxes in the last 8 years or something like that. When we talk about, I'm not talking about politics here, but it even just came up on the SNL monologue with Dave Chappelle. Like when they talked about that initial debate, and it was the Hillary and Trump, and he said, you know, here's the system is that I don't pay taxes, and he said because I'm smart. Well, what he's talking about is he's talking about depreciation in real estate. So, like him or not, he was doing it legally through this. I mean, it's still questionable. There's lots of things that are happening, but the avenue of doing the depreciation from real estate is the vehicle that he was talking about, and that, in the eyes of the government, is a legal way to do that. So, you know, like I said, it was all about. I'm not going to have a political discussion, but that's what he's talking about in the sense that he's not paying taxes because of the depreciation on real estate. So, you know, if we take this like full circle now, so. Now we're looking at these 3 of the different audits, but we're not talking about, you know, the tax aspect of it. So over that, I mean, technically I bought 2 addendum prior to this, but in that like 10-year venue, we built the equity up to 2.7 million on the property, just on the fact that they're paying these properties down and the properties are going up because of appreciation, including the one that we bought at the worst time of the market. And now we have the cash flow on each of those properties, right? So you know, we're cash flowing at more than $10,000 a month at this point. But we're also getting what people don't ever talk about is the principal reduction. So I still have that money that's coming from the principal reduction, so we're doing a monthly principal reduction of $6,000, right? So on an annualized basis, we're almost at $200,000 when we add the cash flow plus the principal reduction. So do I get that $70,000 in my bank account? No, I get it from the reduction of what the properties are, right? And so that's where the equity goes. So, you know, so I mean, the biggest part about this is like, once you're in the scenario of taking advantage of all this, we're not talking about the tax advantages, which are huge when it comes to real estate. We get taxed out the wazoo. We're really fortunate to not pay a ton of taxes either, because the property is offsetting, right? So, you know, what the exciting part I think about real estate is you just make the intention of buying one house, and we're talking about like 5 houses here, 6 houses. I'm talking about in one of them I live in, right? We're not talking about owning 40, 50, 90 units. It's just about buying one and letting the power of real estate take care of it. Okay? Build up more money, do it again. Because we know the data is, if you make more money and you don't put it into real estate, you're gonna find a way to spend it. That's just lifestyle, people all do it. But if you're purposeful this year and you get $50,000 coming in and you go, holy cow, we have to sit in my bank account. Like, my wife and I always joke, like, she was like, we never had any money because as soon as I built up money in the business, I was looking for another property and just kept on doing it. Like, we're doing a full kitchen renovation now. And I'm like, I made an oath that I wouldn't buy a property until we're done with that. So people are, you investing? And she's like, he's not investing. I didn't invest in syndication this year, so like, I don't have to own it. I think we're right at, yeah, we're right at 1 o'clock. So I'm here to answer any questions you guys have. I hope something was of value today. The biggest piece of advice I give to any agent or landlord is what I hear time and time again is I hear someone say, well, I never want to be an investor. So my uncle was an investor and he got totally screwed and it was awful. And the first question I'll ask them is, how long did it take your uncle to rent that property with some problem? And time and time again, they'll say, oh, it took me 60 days or 90 days or 100 days. And why is that? My biggest piece of advice is if you're going to rent a property, put it at or below market rent, and you're going to get your pick of the litter with your tenants. Can we discriminate in any way? In one way we can, and that's on finances. So I don't care who you are, where you're from, anything about you other than what your finances. If I'm getting 5 applicants on a property because and I'm getting a lot of people that want my properties, and they're coming in and there's like the last tenant I rented to, both of them had credit scores high 700s and they're like in their 20s. They're making $250,000 a year and they're both engineers. Am I gonna rent to them? Yeah. All day long. So I have not had a late payment from any of my tenants. I have not had any issues with any tenant. And if I did in New Jersey, that would suck because we're not in a landlord friendly state. But if you do it right, you can be successful. So in 15 years, we've had dozens of tenants. I've gone to 2 of their weddings. I have no issues. Like, treat people well, they're going to treat you well too, and be selective up front.
During COVID, did you have any squatters?
I called up. So what I did on COVID, as soon as things got hairy and we knew it was going to be hairy, I called them all up and I said, hey, how you doing? Because if they're not going to pay, I'd rather know up front so I can prepare for that. They didn't have to, but you know, I had 2 tenants that are high-end personal trainers. And I was like, they're not gonna be able to work, right? But no, they work with all these executives who are like, they were losing their freaking mind. So they're going to their houses and all these people are like, that they work with are high-end. So they have big home gyms and they're on the other side of the glass and they're like, no, we've never been busier because people are losing their mind. All the other ones are just working from home. And like, but I called them up and I said, hey, how you doing? Anything I can do to help? And they go, we're good, we're still working, we're making it through. How are you? Like,
Because you have rentals in like.
yeah, no, yeah, so I think so, 100%. Could I get higher rents in some what we consider less desirable areas? 100%. But do I look like a guy who could shake down anyone for rent? Well, after the easy part of it. But when you're strict, right? I mean, so for me, yeah, so, yeah, it's a great, my whole model is, as soon as I come into the property, I fully renovate it if I can. Like I said with Bill, like, you know, he didn't want anything to change, but, you know, I knew he was gonna leave anyway. Fully renovate them because I want my phone ringing. Like, I mean, the tenants don't want to call you, and I don't want to call you, but I do tell them if anything's coming up, like one thing that's my huge pet peeve is you'll see these things on rental like that, tenant's responsible for the first $100. If it's an under $100 repair, that can be catastrophic to the house. And why am I disincentivizing the agent, the tenant to call me? Like, I always use the example of like, what if the seal on the window's busted and it's starting to leak, right? And now you have moisture coming into the wall. Like, you can have something that was a $4, can of caulk that you can do in 2 minutes, repair that versus destroying part of your house, right? So I'm like, I told the tenants like, hey, anything comes up, just call me. Maybe it doesn't need to be fixed right away and we can defer it or monitor it, or I repair it. Like, just let me know. Like, and like, I don't want anything going bad with the house either, right? So, and if the house is fully renovated, there's not much except for appliance. I freaking hate appliance. But other than that, there's nothing I can do.
Replace them.
Right? I don't want to find my problem. Yeah.
Except the good ones, right? They're
Yeah, no,
It's possible, absolutely.
Yeah, but I
I think it's one of those houses that has like one big oven from like 1950. Can't replace it because it's. Yes.
But anyway, I hope some of this is helpful, like, my thing is I tell people like I took natural liberal arts at Rutgers and barely, so like, I'm not a numbers guy, I'm really not particularly smart, I'm just dumb enough to like go and forward and do this stuff, and like, yeah, and it's funny, because Christina initially wanted nothing to do with it. And then now, like, she's totally versatile, where she's like, hey, like, I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? And she's like, hey, just go do it. I'm like, no, like, you need to look at the numbers now. And now, like, I'm the one who like needs sure to just be the black hat and just make sure that, we're making it. So it was beautiful. I'm sticking around if you guys have any questions, but, please go out there and just buy your real estate. And it's pretty well. Go back to the terrible, like, I work out. Right? No, but like, and like, let's say you're the one side, right? Your one is what your goal is gonna be, and then, your 3 is I'm gonna sell this many listings, this many buyer sales, and then on the third one's like, and I'm gonna have a net profit of X, and I'm gonna put this towards buying a Y.
Do you have
Right?
any advice on how to, I know you were saying you have to market research, everything, like you should research, so like any tips on that research or finding the right area?
Well, find the model that makes sense to you.
Okay.
Right, like, I think if people say, like, can I get better returns in other areas, like the past, like Lackawanna County, which is far, Pennsylvania, and I think you do really well there. I think the reason